My account has been suspended on Skype.
All right, let me.
All right.
Yeah, that's okay. Do you have Adam's? Do you have Adam's email? Or Adam's good.
Let's
Oh, well, here, let me just log into your account with that.
Okay. All right, here it's getting me to change my password. So.
Oh, okay. Testing 1, 2. All right, seems to be working. All right, we'll start up in just a minute.
All right, Adam calling finally. Here we go.
Let's see if they're playing.
Get a book. All right.
Still not high enough?
Let's do.
Here, I got one.
Okay.
We're adjusting you. I'll fiddle around with this thing to make it so it's
okay.
There we go. Whoops, now that's not going to work for us. Let's see. Let's try this. How about if we trade these? We're giving you a booster chair, Adam. All right. That's still not quite high enough. Let's see if we can find something else.
That box? Or?
That box will work. That'll do it for sure.
All right.
Here, I'll tell you what, let me trade.
Okay.
Probably. There we go. All right, I think we've got a quorum. Should we move it back a little bit? That way, maybe you can kind of scoot in a little bit.
Yeah.
There we go. Very good. Still seems. All right, so welcome to the first virtual office hours for the MoCCA Capstone. What we're going to do today is talk about the various projects that people will be signing up for, and we'll each take turns kind of going through our project that we're sort of nominally shepherding. We'll talk more about that in a second. And we'll also take a look at the website and kind of walk you through some of the contents there. So hopefully you can hear us. Let me go ahead and share the screen. If I can find where I put it. Let's see. Somewhere. Why don't we go here? That's a good place to go. So we'll go share this screen. We'll go to the screen, and then we'll go to Sarah page. All right. Hopefully you can see that. Let's see. Adam, can you see the? Can you see it? Okay, good. Can you turn up the volume on him a little bit?
Yeah.
So this is the website for the course. You guys are probably familiar with these in the general sense. We have the announcements page, which gives you an overview of what we're doing. If you read the announcements page and you read the link to office hours, that's probably why you're here. We have the discussion forums. There's already been a lot of discussions so far, which is great. And you'll see that we've organized this to have forums for each of the 3 projects. We'll talk more about the projects in just a second. Then there's also some forums for general purpose topics, but I suspect most people will probably be posting things to the subforum related to the project that they're working on. Down here, you'll see the video lectures. Let's go there first. Video lectures, which will basically just be the virtual office hours that we're going to be going through. So there won't be anything, there'll be no other videos except for the ones that we record live, because each of these things is based on the projects. There's the Capstone IP statement, which is done in the form of a quiz. If you take a look at the FAQ and you look up IP statement, you'll see that you're obliged to agree to the IP statement prior to submitting your first design evaluation. And this is basically just saying that you allow the peer reviewers to analyze and inspect and evaluate your code. If you're not comfortable with that, then obviously you don't need to take the course, but there's nothing here that's particularly profound. It's just basically giving the reviewers the opportunity to look at your code without having you claim that they're violating your intellectual property rights, which is a pretty obvious thing to do. If we come back over here, then we have the 3 project descriptions, and we're going to go through each of these. Each of us will take turns describing them. We have the concurrent daily selfie, and Adam Porter is the lead for that. We have the Impatient or I'm Patient app. I'm the lead for that. And then we have the diabetes management project, and Jules is the lead for that. So what you'll be doing, of course, in the Capstone courses, you'll be picking one of these 3 projects, and then you'll be doing a couple of steps. Take a look at the first FAQ entry for more information about why we're doing it the way we're doing it. Basically, we're ensuring that everybody has a common starting point, and we're trying to make these projects more or less equivalent in scope. They're a little different, of course, but that's to be expected when you're not doing exactly the same thing. Take a look at the grading and logistics page, which talks about some of the activities that will be taking place over the next several months. We have 2 main activities. We have a midterm assessment, where you basically submit your design documents for review and evaluation by the peer assessors. And the goal there is just to give people some feedback ahead of time so they don't spend an awful lot of time going down the wrong path. And that's actually, so basically this is provided as feedback. This will not constitute the final grade. It's just feedback to make sure people are doing well. If you get a very, very low score, then you should think carefully about what you're doing. If you do well, then of course you still have to do the final part of the project. And the final part of the project, of course, will be evaluated in feedback activity number 2. And you have to submit a number of things there. You have to submit a PDF design document explaining how you implemented your spec. By the way, the PDF document is just so that people can read them. The actual diagrams or anything else you do, those don't have to be done in a special tool. You're welcome to draw them on a piece of paper and take a photograph, or draw them on a whiteboard and take a photograph, but make sure that they're legible, make sure that people can understand what you're doing. It's far more important to have it be coherent than have it be fancy using all kinds of special UML tools and so on. So you'll have to provide a UML, or provide a design document. You have to provide the source code for both the client and the server side. And we don't require the peer reviewers to actually run your code, although it's great if they can. But you have to provide a table that explains how you mapped the requirements from the grading rubrics that we'll put out here shortly to the actual source code, so people can tell quickly where to go to look to make sure you did the requirements. You have to provide all the source code and the project files. You're responsible for not putting proprietary software in your solution. If you put proprietary stuff in there, that's going to cause everybody a lot of headaches. So don't use proprietary stuff. Either make it code you wrote, code that we wrote and provided as examples, or open source code that you get from a freely available resource on the web. And then the last thing you need to do is provide a screencast video showing your project. And I would put that on YouTube or some other site, and then just provide a link to it. Please don't include the video in what you upload, because it'll be gigantic and will be hard to get onto the Coursera platform. So then people will review each other's work just like we always have done in the other classes. So that part should be pretty straightforward. Again, real quick on the midterm feedback activity, you don't have to do something super fancy, but you need to convince the reviewers that you know what you're doing and you understand how you're going to fulfill the requirements in the rubric, even if you haven't finished them. And you're welcome to use whatever means for conveying that. Again, UML diagrams, free text, hand-drawn diagrams, stubs or APIs that you've fleshed out, anything to give people a sense of what you're doing. And it's also a way to keep you guys up to speed with what's going on in the class and not procrastinating to the last minute and trying to do it all the final week. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and talk about each of the projects. I'll go ahead and do the one first, and then we'll let Adam go because he only has a short time here. And I'll just give a quick overview of this project. This project is a project that comes from a company that does oncology treatment and radiation therapy equipment. It's called Varian, and they have offices in Palo Alto and around the world. And we've done some work with them, and so they were generous in offering up some requirements for how people would go ahead and schedule access to their very expensive treatment equipment. And as you see, if you read the opening paragraph, the therapy machines are typically very expensive, so you want to keep them as occupied as you possibly can. Typically, the patient appointments are every 15 minutes or so. And if people arrive early or late, we want to try to use this app, the inpatient app, in order to be able to schedule access to the machine. So it's basically a fancy calendar / work queue manager. And the basic idea here is that you want to maximize the utilization of the radiation treatment machine. That's the key thing. You want to keep that thing as busy as possible. But it's up to you to decide whether this thing is open 24/7 or open 9 to 5 or what the hours are. You could make that configurable, of course. And the second thing is you don't want to unduly delay patients from being treated at roughly the time they're scheduled to arrive. Now, as anybody who's ever gone to the doctor knows, this is sometimes easier said than done, right? So people show up at different times. They may show up late. They may show up early. Things might run over. They may need to take a break. You may need to fill out paperwork and so on and so forth. So we basically want to try to keep the machine as busy as possible. But if somebody gets bumped a little bit, we don't want them to have to go back to the end of the queue. We want them to get put back into the queue as close as possible to when their original time was. So that's what makes this an interesting scheduling problem. And of course, there's all kinds of different ways to do this. I'll say something very briefly here so we don't have to repeat this in the other discussions. Every project has to fulfill certain basic requirements. So you have to have multiple users via individual user accounts. You don't necessarily have to use dynamic accounts. You could hard code the accounts if you wanted to, and that will play off some of the stuff that you learned in the latest couple of MOOCs, the most recent MOOCs. You also have to be able to have user-facing operations that are available only to authenticated users, so you make something that requires authentication. You have to use at least one instance of at least 2 of the fundamental Android components: activity, broadcast receiver, service, and content provider. You have to interact with a Spring-based service over a network via HTTP or HTTPS. You need to be able to navigate between at least 3 different user interface screens, which shouldn't be hard given the requirements that we have in all the projects, but you have to have at least 3. You have to be able to use some advanced capabilities that we covered. So these would be things like multimedia capture, touch gestures, animation sensors, as well as stuff we didn't necessarily cover in much detail, but you may know about, like push notifications, Bluetooth, search, and so on. So it's up to you to decide what you're going to use and then to document that you've done that. And then you also have to do stuff in the Android side that runs off the UI thread. And that, again, is pretty straightforward for all the applications because you don't want to be downloading anything from a web service in the UI thread. So those are the requirements that everybody needs to implement. And then for each app, there's also maybe 5 to 7 requirements that are specific to the app. And then there's also a section with implementation considerations, which are things you should think about, among other things, as you do your application. These are not requirements. They're just things to keep in the back of your mind as you do the requirements to make sure you're doing it properly and effectively. So real quickly, for the inpatient app, here are some of the roles and some of the requirements on those roles. There's a patient, The patient's the primary user of this app, and it's basically a data structure that contains the core information that identifies the patient, which includes things like their name, first name, last name, when they were born, their medical record number, and their appointment time or times. So that would be something you'd want to have a screen to enter that information for each patient. When a patient arrives at the waiting room for the treatment department, the center, they check in, and that basically verifies their identity. And you can imagine that there might be a password or some other way to identify the patient or a patient record number. And then they put in their appointment time, and that gets added to a work queue. And the queue is basically the list of patients waiting to be seen on the app. And this is serviced in FIFO order, but the order may vary for reasons we'll talk about in a second. But as much as possible, we're trying to do things in the order that people basically check in. And so the app, of course, will tell patients when their expected waiting time based on their position in the queue. So you might have an appointment for 10:15, but there may be somebody who's running long, or there may have been some rearrangement. So your actual appointment might be 10:20 or 10:25, or your actual appointment might get moved forward because someone may have canceled. So being able to cancel somebody in the queue is also important. Sometimes patients need additional time. They need to go to the bathroom. They need to fill out paperwork. They need to change and so on. So they can delay their appointment time in up to 5-minute increments. And it's up to you to decide whether you let them do that, in perpetuity, or whether they give a limit on how many times they can readjust their time to delay. And once that happens, of course, the queue has to be readjusted. My recommendation is to try to adjust the queue in a way that maximizes access to the treatment machine. So if somebody's going to be delaying and there's somebody there who's going next, let that person go ahead of them, and then put the person who's delayed right after them in the queue. You don't put them at the end of the queue. You just kind of reshuffle them back as close to where they would have gone as before. And also, people may cancel, or people may take less time to do the treatment, or people may show up wildly early. If they show up wildly early, you'll have to figure out what to do. Obviously, if there's an open slot, you might want to put them in it, but you'll have to kind of decide those details. And then when the patient is ready to go in the treatment area, you have to identify their identity once again. The reason for that, of course, is because between the point in time when they check in and when they go off and go to the restroom, they may have changed with an imposter, or you just want to make sure that you're treating the right person with the right treatment and not giving the wrong person the wrong treatment. And after 15 minutes, their treatment is finished, or whenever they're done, their treatment is finished and they're removed from the queue. And then there's another role called an admin, which is a person that can basically view the queue, mark a patient as waiting, seen, being seen, remove them from the queue, adjust the patient wait times, and so on. And you might even want to go as far as to be able to have some options for conditionally rearranging the queue and then giving the admin a choice of different arrangements. So it's kind of like a navigation app that lets you choose different routes. There may be different ways of arranging the queue. And as you might imagine, figuring out an optimal arrangement of the queue might take some time. So that might be a good operation to run concurrently in the background on the web service. But you can figure that out for yourself as part of the assignment. So that's basically the requirements. Then there's a bunch of implementation considerations. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you have questions about them, feel free to post them on the discussion forum. These are just things to think about to make sure that you're doing your assignment in the most effective way and to make sure that you're fulfilling the requirements. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to Adam, and he's going to talk about the daily selfie application. And let's see if we can make sure we can see him. Actually, I guess Adam, we don't necessarily have to see you.
Just here
we can hear you. Yeah. So let me go back over here. I've got the app up. I've got the assignment up. So you can go ahead and just talk to the parts you want to talk about.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. I'm glad to have you here for the Capstone. Congratulations on getting through all the different classes. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the concurrent daily selfie application. Now, Doug already went through the 7 or so requirements that are standard across all the applications. So I'm only going to talk about the requirements that are specific to the concurrent daily selfie. So for those of you who took a more recent version of my two courses, so Handheld Systems Part 1 and Part 2, in Part 2 we instituted a mini project, and the idea was that you had an application that would encourage people to take a selfie, a picture of themselves every day. So you've probably seen some YouTube videos and things where someone takes a video of themselves, every day for a year or so, and then you can put them together in a movie and watch how the subject has changed throughout the year. So we wanted to build an app to support that kind of thing. Now, of course, if you don't believe in taking pictures of yourself or something like that, the subject could be anything. You could take a picture of a tree and watch how it changes every day. But the main thing is that we want to build an app that supports that kind of activity. Now, we're going to start with that basic idea, and then for the capstone, we're going to add some of the cloud-based interaction. So let me go through a couple things, and then some of the details will become clear here. So first of all, just some definitions. So a selfie is just going to be an image that's captured by this concurrent daily selfie application, and it's going to be taken by the user. So the user basically will use the built-in camera app on their device. They'll take a picture of themselves or whatever they want. They'll take a picture, and then that picture will get saved for that. For that particular image. Okay. Now the idea here is to take these pictures frequently, right, or periodically. So we're also going to define a concept called a reminder. So you'll be able to have some sort of reminder that sets a unit of time. So you might say, I want to take this selfie every day, but if you wanted, you could have it every hour. You could have it every week. It's really up to you. So the user should be able to set some kind of reminder time limit, and then when that time elapses, the application should then somehow notify the user, hey, it's time to take your selfie. So you might use Android notifications to do that kind of thing. Every time you take a picture, that selfie will get saved, and there should be some way to view all the selfies that you've saved over time. Okay, and so we're going to require that you be able to view those in a list view, and so the user should be able to scroll through those, and then you can decide how you want to do that. Do you want to do it in time order, which makes a lot of sense? Maybe oldest time first, oldest time, newest time first. That's really up to you. Okay, but you should be able to scroll through some nice list view. You may even want to break it up by months and years and things like that. If a user clicks on an individual selfie within this list view, then you should open up another activity that then shows a full-size view of that selfie. Okay. Now, up to this point, that's pretty much what you did in the mini project for Android Part 2. So what we want to add now, though, is to add some interaction with the cloud. So the idea now is that the user should be able to select some number of these selfies. They should also be able to select some number of graphic effects. So maybe blurring or charcoaling or changing the colors, things like that. There's some libraries that you can look for to show you how to do those kinds of things. But the idea is that the user will select a set of selfies. The user will select a set of effects, and then the user will request that the effects be applied to the selfies. Now, when that happens, that request needs to go to a cloud-based service that's going to actually do the heavy lifting of applying the effects to the selfies. And that operation needs to be concurrent. So if a user picks 2 or 3 selfies, picks one effect and says go, we shouldn't block the whole application at that point. They should be able to go back and pick another set of selfies, pick another set of effects, and send those out as well. So the real additional factor here will be concurrently, we'll be selecting these selfies and effects to apply, pushing those to the cloud, and doing all that concurrently, and then being able to get the results back, and then incorporate those into your set of saved selfies. So that's really all there is to this application. Again, like Doug said, there's a whole list at the end of the write-up. There's a whole list of implementation considerations. You should probably read through those and kind of think a little bit about it. how will users set the reminders? How will they be notified when a reminder has elapsed? Where are you going to store the images? Are they going to be on the device? Are they going to be in the cloud? Are they going to be partially between both? So the whole number of issues to think about in terms of implementation considerations. But I think that's enough to get you started. So like Doug said, if you have any more questions, please post them to the Capstone website, discussion forums, and we can kind of handle them over there. So good luck, and happy coding.
Super, thanks, Adam. Let's go ahead now, and we will. Let's go ahead and go to the diabetes management app, and Jules can talk about that one.
Yep. So this is a project that comes from collaborators that Doug and I have worked with here at Vanderbilt, and they do work with teens that have diabetes and are trying to manage their treatment. So if you're a diabetic teen, you have to deal with taking insulin and checking your blood sugar, which it's hard enough being a teenager, but in having to deal with a disease at the same time, and the treatment of your disease is very challenging. So one of the things that has been helpful in some of the research is to give teens an ability to capture the information and provide reminders to themselves of that, capturing information about checking their blood sugar and what they've been doing in their activities, and then providing them feedback on the information they captured to try to help them understand when they're doing a good job and what are the things that are going on in their lives when they're doing well, and also helping them to understand how their parents and providers and other people can support them in keeping up with the different tasks that they have to do from a treatment perspective. So the idea behind this app, and we'll go ahead and scroll down here to some of the functional descriptions, is that it's an app that at periodic times reminds the teen to essentially do a check-in, where a check-in is providing information about their treatment. So it may be checking in and providing information about the last time that they checked their blood sugar, what they've been eating. It could be other questions about their lives, about where they were or what's going on from a mood perspective. Are they feeling good? Are they happy? Are they not? And the goal is to collect this information from the teenager at regular intervals throughout the day, and then provide feedback to them to show them how how they've followed through with their treatment, show them the data that's been collected, and try to help them understand what are the things that they could do to make it easier to adhere to their treatment, or what are the things that are happening in their lives or that they're eating that really affect their blood sugar and make them feel bad later. So the goal is to be able to provide this feedback system to teenagers and really help them to manage their diabetes better. A part of this is also trying to go through and help teens to better coordinate with their doctors or their parents or anyone else who's supporting them in their treatment. And the way that this manifests itself in the app is that teens need to be able to decide other people, and it could even be a friend, who can receive information about their check-ins. So the information could be anything from, just that they checked in and the fact that they did it, to really detailed information about what their blood sugar levels were, something that maybe their doctor wants to see. And so the idea is to provide the teens the ability, if they choose, and it's up to the teenager, to share that information with other people that could be helpful to them, and also the ability to decide what information from their check-ins gets shared with those other people. So it's about helping the teenager build a network, and then those people, could call up the teenager and say, hey, I see that you've been having a hard day and your blood sugar, you've been having trouble, and they might be able to help them talk through it and understand what's going on. Now, some of the things that you need to consider above and beyond the standard requirements for all of the projects. One of the big ones is, what information are you going to be collecting from teens, and how are you going to define that? So you could just have a hard-coded set of questions that you're asking teens. So, for example, the questions below could be hard-coded into the app, and provided to the teens always. On the other hand, you could also go and make it so that these questions are configurable, so that when a teenager is basically being set up with the application for the first time, you could configure the questions that are relevant to them and make the questions more or less specific to that person, depending on what you want to do. You may even add questions that aren't here. So you could also do it with a more sophisticated mechanism to where each individual user could have their own set of questions that get asked to them. Of course, whatever you do, if you have a hard-coded set of questions, it may make it easier to do the feedback part where you're showing them, let's say, graphs or charts about their blood sugar. If you have configurable questions, you're going to have to think really carefully about how you can take that information from those configurable questions and map them into some type of graphical feedback of their information. So, hard-coded questions will be much easier to do the graphical feedback for, but maybe not quite as interesting as customizable questions. But if you do customizable questions, you're going to have to think carefully about how they get mapped into the graphical feedback. And maybe what you have is something where you have certain common questions that are across all of them that you can provide graphical feedback, and then certain ones that you can't provide as sophisticated of feedback because they're customized for each person. So that's one of the really important things that you should think through when you're planning on how you're going to build this. Another really important one that will be important in your design is the aspect of how you're going to allow the teenager to choose what information they share and who they share it with. And this will be another one of the most sophisticated things that you'll have to do in this application, is setting up those sharing policies and thinking how that sharing takes place. So those are the two really, really critical pieces of this application that you need to think through when you're doing it from a design perspective. A lot of the other things, there's a lot of other really interesting things you can do, from how you might react to this data, to how you may share it, to what types of visualizations you provide for feedback. There's all kinds of things where you can really just knock yourself out if you want to, of going above and beyond, creating some cool visualizations and things that would be helpful to teenagers. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up the overviews and go into some of the detailed questions.
All right. So let's take some questions here. How many students are in the course? I haven't looked, so I don't know. We'll take a look later. Let's see. Are the ideas for projects B and C driven by corporations? No. The one for B came from the inpatient project I talked about, comes from Varian, who make and sell image or radiation treatment machines, and C, as Jules just talked about, comes from projects we've worked on here at Vanderbilt University. Are we going to have virtual office hours every week? Not necessarily. I don't know whether there's enough stuff going on every week that makes it relevant. We'll definitely have a couple, though, throughout the section, and we'll also, of course, have one when it comes to the midterm design point of view to ask to talk more about this. But if you have questions, feel free to post them on the discussion forum. Is there any template or example of the design document for both midterm and grading? We will be giving out the rubric shortly, but you can do whatever you want for the design document. And if you take a look at the FAQ, it talks more about that. What database needs to be used on the server side?
So you can use whatever you want. You can use the embedded SQL database that you like, H2, that comes with Spring. You could use MongoDB. You could connect to Amazon RDS in the cloud. Whatever you want to do is perfectly fine, as long as you meet the project requirements.
What are the video lectures in this course? Well, you're looking at them right now. Does the final project involve entirely independent work? Absolutely. How to write the specification of the project, whether a sample or form. Again, use your judgment, what you'd like to do. And what are the requirements for the specification of the project? And you'll see, of course, that that will all be mapped out. It's described already, but we'll map that out when we put the rubrics out shortly. How will a follower of a teen communicate with them? allowing the follower the ability to call the teen enough? Does the app have to have messaging integrated so the follower and the teen can communicate with the app?
The only requirement is that the teen can share information with the follower in some way. You don't have to have two-way communication. So you could just have it so the follower can call the teen or just be aware. But the key is that you do have to have some flow of information that's automatic from the teenager to the follower. And you can decide how you do that.
Daily selfie. Should we have selfies both in client and the server? So you'll need, if you read the description, the project description, you'll need to be uploading the selfies from the device to the server where they get processed concurrently and then downloaded back to the device. So yes, you'll have selfies on both client and server, but it all depends on how you want to store them or if you need to store them in the server. That's entirely up to you. Can I manage the data in a repository similar to the previous MOOCs? Well, I certainly hope so, because that's the whole goal, is to be able to leverage what you've done in previous examples. Will there be sample demo applications that capture the functional requirements? No, you get to do this all yourself. Should the selfies be stored in the content provider? That's one of the implementation considerations. You're welcome to store them there, or you can store them in a file. It's up to you. The idea of all these things is to let you be maximally creative and doing what you'd like to do. Do we have a say what projects you're working on? No, you can basically choose whatever you want and you can change your mind, although I recommend that by the time you get to the midterm design review, you've kind of committed to a project and you probably want to stick with that one, otherwise you'll have an awful lot of work to do to make up for it. But you're welcome to change your mind at any point. Image processing is done on the server but applied on the client. Please clarify the requirement. You do the image processing on the server and then you send the processed image back to the client. So that's real straightforward. Is it possible to provide an MVP framework with app compat? I tried to use MOOCs 1, but app compat requires the super be called before the set content view. You're welcome to do whatever you'd like. You can modify it as you see fit. All the source code is available, so you can change it any way you'd like in order to do it the way that you want. Let's see. Do the selected followers get information every time the teen does the check-in?
It's up to you how you implement it. I mean, it could be something that's immediate and instantaneous. It gets sent out, or it could be something where the teen's device, does it once a day. It uploads and syncs the information. It's really up to you how you want to implement this feature.
And speaking of syncing, there's a question: how should we implement the syncing of data? Do it any old way you want. You can have people explicitly request the data and have it sent back as a request. You could implement a sync adapter if you wanted to, but you don't have to. You could have an alarm that goes off periodically, and at that point you go out and try to sync things. That's kind of what a sync adapter does, but you wouldn't have to follow exactly the same protocol that it uses. So whatever you want to do, it's up to you. Feel free to be as creative as you want.
Could you explain one more time the 2 key factors to pay attention to while implementing the diabetes project? One of the things that you want to think about is what data you're going to be collecting and whether or not it's hard-coded, the questions that you're going to be collecting data on, or if you're going to make it so that those questions can be configured somewhere. So for example, you might make it so that somebody could log in on the server, an administrator, and then create questions for that particular teen. Or you could even allow teenagers to create their own questions that they thought it would be helpful to be prompted with regularly, in addition to some basic questions that are important. So that's one thing, is whether or not it's a dynamically configured set of questions. And you may, even if it's dynamically configured, you could still have the same sort of set of questions automatically given to each teenager as part of a template, and then you add or remove. So that's one thing to consider, is how you're going to, what data you're going to collect and how you're going to configure that. And then the second piece that you should really consider is the sharing aspect and how you're going to control what data gets shared and how it gets shared to the followers of the team.
There's a bunch of questions now that are really also addressed in the FAQ, so I'll just refer you to the FAQ. They want to know if you can use third-party libraries that were not taught in the course. So far, the answer is yes, but you have to make sure that they're open source in order to use them. That's in the FAQ. There's a question about what IDE, Java, and Android versions are to be used. That's also in the FAQ. The answer is it doesn't matter, because the source code doesn't need to be compiled by anybody except the original author. So it's up to you, but read the FAQ. Can we use Android Google APIs? Sure. Is a sign-up screen required? It's up to you. However you want to do the authentication. That could be one of your screens, or you could do it through some other means. How should syncing be done? Should it be done at predefined intervals or done when an event occurs? If so, how can we push sync data on demand? Totally up to you how you do syncing. We don't care. As long as the data shows up there in an effective way, it's up to you to make those decisions. You may be getting the feeling that an awful lot of the answers are, it's up to you, and that's intentional. We're giving you a lot of creativity, a lot of room to be innovative, a lot of room to build upon what we taught you in the earlier MOOCs and do things that represent your own style and the way that you like to work. Can we use navigation views and drawers? Absolutely, feel free, no problem with that. That's, again, up to you. What Android devices are the apps tested on? Whatever you want to test them on. Do you have any recommendations for students regarding the actual phone tablet model to use for testing? Whatever you happen to have is fine. What's your opinion about using developer phones? Don't go for it, not a problem. Is it sufficient to develop the app in the emulator, or do you need a real device? Use whatever you feel like. At the end, you just need to make a movie out of it, which can either be on a real device or it could be on an emulator. What's the minimum application the app needs to support? Whatever you want it to support, doesn't matter. Feedback can be viewed graphically. Can you please explain this? Well, use something like what? JChart or?
Yeah, charts. It could be, a list, a table that displays all their check-ins, and they can get more detailed information. It can be pie charts. It could be, simple scatter plots. It could be any type of graphical feedback to them about the data that's been collected, so they can see it.
And there's all kinds of open source chart libraries available that you can use if you want to go that way. Or basically, the idea is to do something that is visual and interesting to the user. Was syncing on demand done in the previous MOOCs? No, and that's why we're not requiring it. Let's see. Is it possible to use Facebook or Google for login? Sure. Why not? Are we going to have access to Google Hub source code, lectures, and content for all the 6 MOOCs? Certainly for the ones that we've taught, you will. I just sent Professor Porter a question and asked him if he can put his stuff back online. You should be able to get access to his later MOOCs, though. His MOOCs are continually running, and they have essentially the same data, so the same content. So you should be able to subscribe and join and view anything there. But I'll check and see. I asked him whether he would put his older stuff online. I'm not sure why it's not online. Let's see. Is the basic requirement section organization-specific APIs mentioned? Are we going to use such APIs for any of the project listed in this Capstone session? Probably not. I don't think so. We just have that in there as a general disclaimer in case there's stuff that we work on with particular companies. Last year, for example, there was an app in the project, in the Capstone project, that related to some stuff that Amazon had done. And so they had allowed people to use Amazon-specific APIs. But as you can see by reading the project descriptions, there is, in fact, nothing in there that's organization-specific, so I wouldn't worry about it. Okay, well, looks like we got a lot of questions. Those were good questions. The answer to many of them, as I mentioned before, is go read the FAQ. The FAQ has information on almost everything in it, and or parts of the website, like the part that talks about the grading and logistics. In a few days, we will put up the detailed rubrics. We're not putting the detailed rubrics up quite yet because we want to make sure that we have correctly nailed down the requirements in the descriptions of the projects as unambiguously as we can, knowing that just like regular software development in real world, the requirements are never perfect. They always evolve. They never survive first contact with the developers and the users and so on. So we may modify a few of them based on feedback or confusion. And then when it looks like things have kind of converged and settled down, we'll go ahead and put out the rubrics, which, by the way, will be directly from the project descriptions. It'll just be a little bit more stylized way of deciding whether or not people have actually fulfilled those requirements. So you can easily get started on your projects now without waiting for the rubrics to be out there. There's going to be no surprises if you read the project descriptions as they are now. What are the prizes being offered when the capstone is complete? So that's something that the Coursera folks are working out. Last year, they gave prizes that I think were Android tablets. Is that right? I think there were Android tablets, and I think there was also maybe some gift certificates to Amazon. So we'll kind of see what we get this time, but that was what we had last time. Will syncing on demand be done in future MOOCs? Yes, we'll talk about syncing on demand in the new MOOC on pattern-oriented software architecture for content. So the next time the specialization restarts, which will be in a couple weeks, the fifth MOOC in the specialization is a new MOOC, which is actually just a split of our previous fifth MOOC from the last specialization. And we split off the client-side content discussions into its own MOOC, and we'll cover sync adapters in that. I suspect that'll probably start up sometime in 2016. But keep an eye out for that. I'll be restarting the concurrency MOOC here in, gosh, about 2.5 weeks or so. It'll start, I think it's October 5th or 6th or something like that. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then we thank you guys very much for joining. And as always, we'll turn this virtual office hour into a movie here very shortly and continue the discussions on the forums. Thanks again for joining, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.